He was a man who shaped the map of a continent with his mind and his will. A brilliant general who commanded the love of millions and the bitter hatred of millions more. He crowned himself emperor, defying 1,000 years of tradition. He was Napoleon Bonaparte, and his shadow still falls across the modern world. Our story begins not on a grand battlefield, but on a rugged, windswept island, Corsica, 1769. Just months after this rocky land was conquered by France, a child was born into a family of minor nobility. His name, Napoleone Bonaparte. From his earliest days, he was an outsider, a Corsican by birth, a Frenchman by circumstance. At school in mainland France, his accent was mocked, his pride bruised. He buried himself in books, in histories of great empires and treatises on the art of war. A young man of ferocious intelligence, burning with ambition. The old world was cracking apart. The monarchy fell. The streets of Paris ran with blood. And as the kings of Europe moved to crush the revolution, a young artillery captain saw his chance. At the siege of Toulon, he devised a daring plan to bombard the British fleet. It worked. Overnight, he was promoted to brigadier general. He was 24. Then, in October 1795, a royalist mob marched on the government in Paris. The desperate politicians turned to the young, unknown officer. Napoleon placed cannons at the key streets and unleashed a whiff of grape shot. The mob scattered. He had saved the Republic. His reward was command of the ragged, starving army of Italy. In Italy, he faced the combined might of Austria and Sardinia. His army was outnumbered, ill-equipped, and demoralized. But Napoleon spoke to them not as a distant aristocrat, but as a fellow soldier. He promised them glory. With breathtaking speed and audacity, he divided enemy forces, struck where least expected, and won victory after victory. He became a hero to his men. In 1798, he led an expedition to Egypt. It was a bold, romantic, and ultimately disastrous gamble. He sought to cut off British trade routes and bring enlightenment to the ancient land. He brought scholars and scientists along with his soldiers. Yet, despite tactical victories like the Battle of the Pyramids, his fleet was destroyed by the British under Nelson at the Nile. Stranded, his dream crumbling, he made a fateful decision. He abandoned his army and sailed back to France. A lesser man would have been ruined, but France was in crisis again, and Napoleon returned not as a disgraced general, but as a savior. In November 1799, he participated in a coup. The weak government was overthrown. Napoleon emerged as the first consul of France. He was 30 years old. He reformed the law, creating the Napoleonic Code, a system that swept away feudal privileges and established clear, modern laws for property, family, and individual rights. Its influence stretches from Quebec to Japan. He reformed education, created the Bank of France, and even instigated the first modern street numbering system. He was building a new state from the ashes of revolution. But peace would not last. In 1800, at the Battle of Marengo, he snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, securing his hold on power. By 1804, his ambition reached its zenith. In the Cathedral of Notre Dame, in the presence of the Pope, he took the crown from the pontiff's hands and placed it upon his own head. He crowned himself Emperor of the French. It was a stunning, symbolic act. He was the revolution made flesh, yet he had become a new kind of monarch. For a decade, Napoleon bestrode Europe like a colossus. At Austerlitz in 1805, he fought his masterpiece, luring the combined Russian and Austrian armies onto a foggy field. He shattered them, declaring to his troops, "You have covered yourselves with eternal glory." He redrew the map. He placed his brothers on thrones across the continent. His Grande Armée seemed invincible, but the seeds of his downfall were already sown. In 1812, he assembled the largest army Europe had ever seen. over 600,000 men from across his empire. His goal, to force Tsar Alexander I to submit. The Russians refused to give battle. They retreated, drawing him deeper into the vast, unforgiving landscape. He won a bloody victory at Borodino and reached Moscow, only to find the ancient city abandoned and set ablaze. With no one to surrender to and winter closing in, he had no choice but to retreat. The Great Retreat was an epic horror. The Russian winter, hunger, and constant Cossack attacks decimated his army. He returned to Paris with barely 20,000 men. The myth of his invincibility was broken. Europe rose against him. In the Battle of the Nations at Leipzig in 1813, he was decisively defeated. Forced to abdicate, he was exiled to the tiny island of Elba. But the story was not over. He escaped. He landed in France with a handful of men. The army sent to arrest him instead rallied to his banner. For 100 days, he was emperor again. He promised a new, peaceful France. But Europe would not gamble. The Allied armies massed in Belgium. On June 18, 1815, Napoleon faced the Duke of Wellington's steadfast army. He came close to victory. But the late arrival of the Prussian army under Blücher turned the tide. His last great army was broken. This time, there would be no negotiation. He was exiled to a remote, windswept rock in the South Atlantic, Saint Helena. Here, the conqueror became a prisoner. He spent his final 6 years dictating his memoirs, shaping his legend for history, and arguing with his British captors. He died on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51. The official cause was stomach cancer. So, who was Napoleon? A tyrant or a visionary? A warmonger or a reformer? He was, undoubtedly, all of these things. He was a paradox. He ended the chaos of the revolution, but became an autocrat. He spread the ideals of liberty and the Napoleonic Code across Europe, yet he did so at the point of a bayonet. He inspired both democratic movements and dictatorships for centuries to come. His wars cost millions of lives, but his reforms shaped the modern state. His body was returned to France in 1840, a nation now ruled by a king, yet which still longed for the glory he represented.